Hi, I'm Brett and welcome to Random Book Talk. I'm absolutely thrilled to be talking to Tom Keneally, one of Australia's, in fact the world's most important writers. Tom's career spans nearly 50 years and he's still a best-selling author today. His latest book, Shame and the Captives, is in store now, and I'm talking to Tom about Shame and the Captives, that very book. Tom, what really struck me about your latest novel is once again you return to the theme of war, and the Cowra breakout is at the heart, I guess, of your latest book. But war is a theme that you touch on nearly all of your books. What is it about war that attracts you, and the stories that come from war?
It could be something pathologically wrong with me, but my justification is that I was a child of the war. I remember the outbreak from Cowra. We had relatives in a place called Mandurama near Cowra, and I remember hearing of their precautions to make sure the Japanese did not invade their home. It was poorly understood that this mass breakout by young Japanese men on a frosty night, an acutely frosty night in early August 1944, was not an attempt to attack the public. It was, above all, an act of self-immolation to validate that army code that then existed in Japan, that there should be no prisoners, no true soldier surrenders. And they knew that their memorial services had been held in Japan by their families. And in a sense, they were validating those memorial services.
They were already dead.
Yes, they considered themselves already dead. But over the course of the war, they began to doubt that we would shoot them all when the war ended. It was a proposition that was believed in the Japanese compound earlier in the war. But as the war went on, the question arose, can we trust these strange, arrogant white people to kill us before we have to face the shame of going home?
It's a very different response to war. And this concept of enemy, which I find a really interesting one, and the Japanese were a particular kind of enemy because they were so foreign. They're beyond the obvious, their language, their food, their responses to being prisoners of war, where Australians were, if captured, the idea was, really, let's sit it out and we'll get home eventually. The Japanese had a very different response, and Australians, I suppose, didn't really know how to respond to that or understand it.
And indeed, they were baffled by our attitudes. We had perhaps 1,000 prisoners of theirs in Cowra. They had 25,000 of ours. And our authorities were always scared that if anything wrong happened with these Japanese prisoners, either in Cowra or in Hay or in any of the other places they were, that there would be reprisals against our people. Therefore, this was a calamity. There is a commandant or a deputy commandant of the prison camp in my book whose own son is a prisoner of the Japanese. And he breaks down when he sees the slaughter that has been created in Compound C of the camp in my book, the fictional camp in my book, the slaughter that has been created by the rush to the wire. He grieves for his own son. He is panicked that his name will appear in the press and that there will be reprisal against his own son. That was very much the attitude, but it was white Australia, and even the Italians in the compound were considered extremely foreign. But the ones who weren't fascists were allowed out onto the farms.
Yes.
And one of the lenses through which I try to look at the Japanese outbreak is the relationship between a young Italian anarchist POW who's put on a farm and the woman of the farm whose husband is a POW from the Greek Crete campaign. He's in Austria. She's very interested in prisoners because she always feels when she approaches them that she can somehow get some clue to what's happening with her husband, and that a kindness from her in this hemisphere will create a kindness for him in the hemisphere where he's a captive too.
Yeah, which I thought was very interesting and kind of odd at the same time, because they're sort of disconnected in some ways, but that was very interesting. There is a bit of conflict within the sort of inhabitants of the town that in the novel is called Gawell, where they actually are in many ways quite kind to the prisoners of war, to the prisoners, because they do want or believe that their kindness will save their own sons. Was that particular to the inhabitants of Cowra, or as you were saying, is it more sort of an attitude that the entire country had?
No, I think the public sentiment of the entire country was very vengeful. But then in Cowra, I think Cowra's always been a special case in its relationship to the Japanese, and is today. You know, the wonderful thing about going to Cowra is that there's such an atmosphere of reconciliation in that town between the two sides, and the dead of our side, because we suffered some casualties, and the dead of the Japanese side have an equivalent honour and commemorated by that great garden that the Japanese have built there. And I think it was above all the Australian government whose policy was to provide the wrestling mats, to provide the baseball to the prisoners. And there is a debate in the camp about whether you should play baseball, whether it is an opiate for the prisoners who should be concentrating on exonerating their capture. And a young pilot in particular, a man whose real name was Minami, but whom I called Tengan, that young pilot who was the first Australian POW, the first Japanese POW to be captured by the Australians, he is most anxious to, he's a hardliner, he's most anxious to break out. And both in the book and in real life, the prototype for Tengan was one of the three leaders of the outbreak, and believing sincerely that he must die to expiate his capture.
There are so many themes in the book, and you really capture Australia, you know, mid-century in many ways, and that kind of storytelling, you know, it's so effortless to read. You've been writing for nearly 50 years. I think your first book was published almost 50 years ago. And in reading this, there is a freshness and a skill, and it seems a love of writing that comes through. How have you sustained and remained inspired to keep writing as well as you have for all these years?
Again, it's something that's just there. I posted a tweet yesterday, pretty cool for a 78-year-old to post a tweet.
Yeah.
I posted a tweet that said, I hardly wrote a word today and feel dreadful.
Right.
Someone sent me a tweet and said, Oh, that makes me feel so good because I didn't have a good day either. And I said, it's ridiculous. No one needs to read an old bloke like me anymore, but I need to write. And I said, scribo ergo sum. I write, therefore I am. If I don't scribo, if I don't write, then I ain't.
Then you disappear.
And so I do feel validated by writing. That doesn't mean people have to read the book. It is, they don't need my books, I need my book.
Thank you so much, Tom. I'm looking forward to travelling with you to Cowra in a few short weeks, actually. But if you'd like to learn more about Shame and the Captives, it's a gripping tale inspired by real events in World War II. It has all of the trademark qualities that you can expect from a Tom Keneally novel. It will keep you up late at night. I remember as a young teenage boy staying up till 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning finishing Schindler's Ark, and you will enjoy this book as much as I did that all those years ago. Go to our website at randomhouse.com.au to learn more about Shame and the Captives, and indeed Tom Keneally and all of his wonderful books. Thank you very much, Tom.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you.
See you next time.